The Michelle Troconis trial hits day number 15, and we are going to completely catch you up with everything that you need to know on the Michelle Troconis trial, and you are going to be completely situated to continue watching this trial and understanding all of the developments that happened in this trial. But before we jump into that, please, number one, if you haven't yet, you got to subscribe, like the video. We are bringing you analysis that no other channel is bringing you. We're breaking it down, we're explaining it all, and you know it. So please help me out also. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment if you want, and that will help the channel. Now, another way to help the channel, people have been asking me, how can we help this channel grow? They understand the value and they understand they're not getting this anywhere else. Well, there's just an easy way. I just partnered up with a suit store that actually I get my suits from. So I figured, what better way to offer this to my subscribers and viewers than to actually give you a product that I actually purchase myself. So I'm leaving the link in the description. They have great quality suits and accessories and anything that you can want. So don't keep wearing that old suit in your closet. Get updated. It's a high quality. It's very reasonably priced, and you'll be helping out the channel. Hit that link in the description and enjoy looking your best. All right, now let's move into the Michelle Troconis trial. So we've had a few detectives and a few policemen testify. We also have had some DNA experts testify. So this is what it all comes down to, okay? So June 2nd, 2019, Michelle Troconis is arrested. She's arrested in the middle of the night in her pajamas. She gets taken to the police station, and she gives over the course of this process, she gives 3 different interviews. And you can also tell that there is some sort of language barrier between Michelle Troconis and the police detectives. Now, it's not a complete bar. It's not like they can't communicate at all, but you can certainly tell that there is some level of a language barrier. And this becomes an issue. It's going to become an issue in this trial, and you can tell they're kind of already putting in some suggestions about this language barrier, but you still can hear very clearly a lot of the discussion that is going on. She just speaks with a little bit of an accent, but still you could hear what she's saying in her stories and how she's responding to questions. So it's not like she didn't understand anything. She certainly understood for the most part. The question is, at what parts didn't she understand? And maybe that's why she started giving perhaps conflicting answers. So let's just go into some of the points that the prosecution made and some of the arguments that the defense made. So number one is that the prosecutor asked the detective, did Michelle Troconis was there with her attorney? Did Michelle Troconis ever ask for an interpreter? And the detective says no. Did her attorney who was there ever ask for an interpreter? And he said no. And he read her Miranda rights in English, and she said that she understood those rights. So she's acknowledging that she understood the English language. She signed the waiver of her Miranda rights, and she received that. She signed it. So that was part of the case that the prosecutor is making, that of course she understands English. She acknowledged that she understands English. She never asked for an interpreter. And if you notice throughout the trial, Michelle Troconis is listening to an interpreter interpret the entire trial from English into Spanish. So that could also, perhaps the prosecution may make a point of this, as saying that this is all just one big game that Michelle is trying to play, that she really doesn't understand English. Now, the fact that you could understand English and still be more comfortable in Spanish is a different point. You know, it could be that she understands English, but she still would like to hear things in Spanish, her native tongue. So that's also, and then she understands it a lot better. So, you know, whether they're actually going to make that argument to the jury, I'm not sure. But certainly the prosecution wants to make very clear that she certainly understands English enough to understand the questions and to be able to respond to the questions. And therefore, if she starts saying conflicting stories, it sounds like she's trying to hide something. And that's kind of the seeds that the prosecution is laying. Now, again, in this trial, and this is an extensive, long trial, there were no opening statements. So we're hearing all this evidence come in, and we don't really know what to do with it. We don't know what's going to be important or not. And that's part of the problem when you go into a trial without an opening statement, without a roadmap for hearing where to start placing this evidence in your head and start figuring out which evidence is more important than some other evidence. So we really don't know. But this is from what I'm seeing. I'm going to give you what my take is on the evidence. So on cross-examination, just with respect to the English barrier, so the defense attorney did bring out that she does very clearly mix up tenses. Sometimes she wants to say, I did something, and she uses the present tense, saying, I do something, or like, I call that person, when she meant to say, I called that person. So you see that she does have some issues with the English language. He also mentions that she did ask if he speaks Spanish, which he said no. So not that she asked for an interpreter, but she did ask if he spoke Spanish to show that she's more comfortable with Spanish. Also, you see clearly that she did not understand certain words, even though she understood most of the words, but certain words you can tell that she had trouble with. In fact, throughout the interview, she says things like, how do you say such a thing, when she's trying to explain a certain concept and she doesn't know the word, she doesn't know the English language well enough to be able to enunciate that word that she's thinking of. So that was also, he also makes a mention that she was woken up in the middle of the night, she was in pajamas, and also the defense attorney makes a mention that at certain points she hasn't eaten in a long time. And actually one of the points that he brought out was that one of the detectives, the main detective on this case, Detective Kimball, who did a lot of the interviewing, he actually left in the middle of the night so that he can go to sleep. And the defense attorney pointed out, well, you got to go to sleep, but did she get to go to sleep? Or is she still stuck in that interview room? Or was she still in custody? And therefore you can't imagine that she slept that well, even if she wasn't technically being interviewed at that time. So that was kind of the point that he was making in a cute way, saying, oh, you got to go to sleep, and now you're going on a full good night of sleep, and now she is still stuck having to answer all these questions when she's exhausted, hasn't eaten, was just jolted out of her bed and arrested. So we should be able to understand why some of her answers may not be so clear, and why her memory may not be that clear. Okay, so now she starts with her story, and her story is the following: the night before the night before this disappearance. So she is woken up by her daughter. She has a daughter. Michelle has a daughter, Nicole. And Nicole is 12 years old. And Nicole calls her, this is Thursday night, because it's something like 12:59 a.m. And she calls her in the middle of the night, and she's scared because there's a thunderstorm going on. So there's thunder and there's lightning, and she's scared. So she calls her mother, calls her on the phone. And Michelle comes and lies down in her bed to comfort her daughter. So she's lying down with Nicole, she's comforting Nicole, and she falls asleep with Nicole in her bed. She wakes up with her daughter, and it's around 6:40 in the morning, and she goes to take a shower. And the way that she says the story is that she goes to take a shower, Fotis wakes up, and then Fotis jumps into the shower with her. And then afterwards, she gets dressed, and she takes her daughter to school. And then she comes home. Now, in some of the interviews, the detective says, remember there's 3 interviews, some of the interviews, the detective says that actually that part about Fotis jumping into the shower with her, she didn't always say that part. So some parts she says that, and some parts she leaves that part out. So what happened? Did he actually take the shower? Was he with her in the morning or not? Was he actually in that house or not? Was he already out to do what we all imagine he did by murdering Jennifer? Okay, so that was one point that they brought up. Now here's another thing. The Detective Kimball says, in his direct examination by the prosecutor, that he checked the weather, and the weather report was that there was very little precipitation, if at any, the night when Michelle is saying that her daughter called her up and said that there's a thunderstorm. So here, the detective is saying that really she's even lying about this whole thunderstorm happening. Now, why is that significant? Why would she feel a need to lie about the thunderstorm? I'm not sure. But they wanted to bring this out to show that she's a liar. And here it completely backfired, because the defense attorney got up and showed different weather reports which show that there was a possibility of a storm in that area, the area exactly where Michelle's house was, where she was staying with her daughter. And he actually shows the detective a video of it raining that night. So he completely shatters this detective. So here you have a point, and this sometimes happens. It's a point where you don't really need to make a point of it. It's who cares whether she was actually lying about the thunderstorm. That doesn't seem like it has a lot to do with the main points of this case, whether she was involved in the conspiracy to murder Jennifer or not. It's just a point that you wanted to, get for extra credit to say that she's a liar. And here it completely backfires. And now the defense completely scored a point by showing that this detective wasn't even being so honest, because it was very clear that it was raining, and there was weather reports showing that there was a possibility of a thunderstorm. So it's very possible that there was a thunderstorm happening then. So it completely backfired against the detective. And again, it was something that really wasn't an important part, that the officer and the detective didn't really need to even bring it up, but yet it seems that they did. Again, we don't know where everything's going because there's no opening statement, but it's hard for me to imagine that point of whether it was raining or not, whether there was a thunderstorm or not, and she was lying about that specific thunderstorm, really plays into the bigger picture here. So that was a really strong, good point by the defense that they were able to make in that case. Now, another point that they were able to make is that this detective at one point in the interview says that there was actually 30 stops that Fotis made. As she's going through the timeline, she says that they stopped a few times, which we're going to get into soon, but he says that no, Fotis actually stopped 30 times, and he knows that. And not only that did he say that, and in fact, that was stopped, and it turns out that he actually had the wrong information. Fotis did not stop 30 times. This detective actually just got fed incorrect information and presented that to Michelle during the interview as though it's fact. And Michelle was actually there a little confused about this 30 stops because she was actually in the car at the time. And it seems like she's honestly confused about this, that he was actually made 30 stops. But she says she was on the phone a lot, she was texting, she was making phone calls, she didn't really realize all the stops, perhaps. I mean, that's kind of how she was explaining it, but it actually seems genuine that she doesn't really know what he's talking about. And he actually was incorrect about this specific situation. But not only that, the defense attorney brought out that this detective actually filed an affidavit saying that Fotis made 30 stops. So here you have a second instance where this detective is caught not being honest or relying on other information which he didn't verify. So you have number one, he's going to be able to make an argument. The defense attorney is going to make an argument to the jury. He could make this argument that this detective keeps tripping up on himself. He's trying to say that there wasn't a thunderstorm and really there was, and then he's trying to make up the stuff about 30 stops, and he even puts it in an affidavit under oath, and that wasn't true either. It's a sloppy job. And then once you show that that's a sloppy job and that he's not saying the truth, well, then you can say, well, that should be imputed into the rest of his investigation on this case. So that were significant points that the defense attorney was able to make. Now, what's so interesting also is that the night before the interview, and this came out also during testimony, the night before the interview with Michelle, they had Fotis in the station also. And they were noticing that there was some communication between Michelle and Fotis by just their looks. They were looking at each other in a certain way. And the detective even says that the way that Fotis was staring down Michelle actually got him nervous for Michelle's safety, the way that Fotis was staring her down. And for the most part, she was keeping her head down and she was crying, Michelle Troconis. But at some point, she picked her head up and their eyes connected, and she apparently looked with some sort of disdain. That's how the detective explained the look, like that she was annoyed and with disdain at him. And he gave a stronger, more sterner look back at her, like something about, you better not say. He didn't say what it said, and obviously you can't do that, but he said it was a very stern look, and it made him have concern for Michelle's safety. And he even tells that to Michelle in another interview. So let's continue with the story. So Michelle comes home after she drops off her daughter in school. And she comes home. And the question was Fotis home when she came home? Was Fotis home when Michelle came home? Was sometime after, I don't know, 7, 8 o'clock. So was he home or not? And this is also where the stories conflict. At one point she says, in one of the interviews, she says that yes, Fotis was home, and she actually saw Fotis. Because remember, they live in this 10,000 square foot house. It's a huge house. And he has an office in that house. And she says that she went to the office and she saw Fotis in the office. So she saw him home. Then she kind of walks that back at other interviews. She walks it back in other interviews and says that no, really, she didn't actually lay her eyes on him. She just assumed that he was home. There was another person, another acquaintance of Fotis's that was there for work, and she saw him, so she assumed that Fotis was home also, but really she didn't actually lay her eyes on Fotis. Fotis actually called her. Another part of the interview is that Fotis called her around that time in the morning, and she thought he was home, but he really wasn't home. So that was another point where they're able to say that you're not being honest with us. But at one point you're saying that Fotis was home, and the other part, in another interview, you're saying that no, he wasn't home. When she's presented with other facts that they say we know that he wasn't home, and once they present that fact, then she changes her story and says, well, maybe he wasn't home. So that also kind of shows that Michelle is not being honest with them. Now, then she says that they did have lunch together. She had lunch together with Fotis between 1 and 2 p.m. And then at some point, Fotis, they finish the lunch, and Fotis goes to a different one of his houses that he wants to show to somebody, a potential buyer, and then he needs Michelle to come over there to help clean up. So they spend some time on that, and they're in separate cars at that time. And then they're back home around 5:30 in the afternoon. And Fotis says, let's go to Starbucks between 6:30 and 7 p.m. Now remember, 6:30 and 7 p.m. is when Fotis was found around the Hartford area, Albany Avenue over there, where he was found putting things in different garbage bags. So she does admit that she was with Fotis at that time, and they were supposed to be driving to a Starbucks. And she says that he goes through this Hartford area, and he starts dropping off making a few different stops. Not 30 stops, but a few stops. And he's throwing things in the garbage. Now, she does say that it wasn't unusual for Fotis to do this. Fotis would, he owns this, he does construction, he has properties, and a lot of times he has these materials that he just wants to dump, I guess, in different garbage cans. So she said that he did do this in the past, dropping off these different garbage bags in garbage cans. So, but she does think it's a little weird that they are around there. So she does acknowledge that. And here again, we have 2 different interviews where she says different things about the drain. Now remember that Fotis is essentially caught on video putting something down the sewer, which eventually the police are able to retrieve, and it was these 2 license plates which he tried to alter, and when they were changed back, the police were able to track that these licenses actually belonged to a car that Fotis used to own. And for some reason, he dumped those license plates in the sewer. So at one interview, she says that she saw him do that. She actually saw him put those license plates in that sewer. And in one interview, she says that she didn't see him put anything in the sewer. And remember, there's also on video, when they make that specific stop, when he's throwing something down the sewer, she gets out of the car and she looks like she bends down near the street and does something herself. So what is she actually doing when she's coming out of that car and putting something down wherever it is? So she says that she actually acknowledges that she opened the car door and went and to put her gum down. She wanted to put her gum, I guess, down into some hole over there. And that's what she was doing. She wasn't throwing anything else out. She was just putting her gum down there. Now, also, some of the suggestions about what happened to Jennifer. So when they're talking about what happened to Jennifer, one of her suggestions is that she understands, again, this is Michelle being fed information by Fotis about Jennifer, that she understands about Jennifer that she has borderline personality disorder, and that at some point in her life she used to hide, just hide from life, hide from parents, hide from her kids. She would just hide. So she suggested, well, maybe she's hiding. Maybe that's what this is all about. Really, she wasn't murdered. She's just hiding because this is part of her borderline personality disorder. And in the response to that, the detectives in that interview say, well, if you were the mother of 5 different children, would you just drop off the map for weeks at a time? And the answer to that, by the way, would be, well, if somebody is really suffering from a serious, personality disorder, a serious mental disease, it's possible. But when they present it that way, so then Michelle kind of walked that back. But that was one of the suggestions that she gave. And again, part of this interview also is that they're pressing her. What do you think happened? What do you think happened? Where's Jennifer? And they're pushing and pressuring her a lot to give them the information because they believe that she actually knows where Jennifer is. And from these interviews, she's either just lying about it, that she doesn't know where Jennifer is, or she actually doesn't really know where she is, and she's just racking her brains to try to give them anything that they can. And she does, it looks from the interview that she's actually trying to help them. And she suggests, I'll do whatever you want. And she starts showing different pictures about where she used to go with Fotis in different areas and where they used to ride their motorcycles together. It looks like she's trying to be helpful. It actually does look like that from the interview. Now, this could be all a game. This could be all that she's just playing them, and this is all part of the plan. But there certainly could be a case that if you look at these interviews, she sat there, she never ended the interview. That's another thing that they brought out on cross-examination. Her defense attorney said, did she ever say, I'm done with the interview? She sat there for hours and hours and hours answering whatever question you asked her. And if she was really trying to hide all this, he doesn't say this part out loud, but I'm assuming he's going to make this argument, that if she's really trying to hide all this, don't you think that she would not be as forthcoming, not as helpful, and say, okay, we've been here long enough, I'm done answering questions, you can come back tomorrow? But she doesn't. Every time the interview ends only by the detectives, by the police officer saying, okay, I guess that's it for today. So it's always the detectives finishing the interview, not her. So it actually the argument could be made that she really is not trying to hide anything. She's really trying to help them out. And even if the prosecution tries to make light of this suggestion that, oh, Jennifer is maybe hiding, but they are pushing her. They're pushing her the entire interview. Where is she? What do you think? Can you give us any ideas? So, that could be the argument back. But, we don't know. We don't really know. Just from the interview alone, you don't see clearly that she's actually part of this plot. There are some questions, there are some contradictions, certainly. But you don't see, at least from what I was watching, from these interviews, you don't see that she's clearly involved. There's certainly, at this point of the trial, there's certainly reasonable doubt, in my eyes. Again, I don't know what the jury's thinking, but it's certainly in my eyes. Okay. Now, there was a timeline that was discovered. Okay, so one of the searches through the house, they discovered this, what seems to be a written out timeline, where essentially it looks like it's going through Michelle Troconis' day. Get up at 6:40, and some other stops that she made that day. A pretty in-depth timeline of what she was doing that day. Now that looks really suspicious. What is she making a timeline for? So what it seems like the prosecution is going to be arguing to the jury is that this was her alibi timeline. That's why she created this timeline. Because she had to know, she had to remember at which part of the day she was supposed to be at certain parts and which phone calls she made. And there's also like a log of phone calls that she made. To who and what happened, was it answered, was it canceled, things like that also. So what is she doing with this timeline? So the prosecution seems that they're going to be suggesting that this timeline was all part of her alibi that she had to remember, and that's why she wrote it down. So what is the answer? What's the answer to this? Why would she have that timeline? Now, another question that I was thinking is that if this timeline really is her alibi, why would she just leave it? They found it in some attaché, some backpack, which was like strewn in the house somewhere. And that's where they found this timeline. If this timeline is like your alibi, this is your way to freedom, don't you think you'd hide it a little bit better? Like, why would it be in the middle of, like, on the floor in some backpack? So, but this seems to be what the prosecution is going to be saying, is that this is actually her alibi timeline that she made in anticipation for this murder, and this was going to be her excuse. Now, she responds to that actually what happened is that we know that Fotis and Jennifer were going through a very contentious and vicious divorce and a very vicious custody battle. They had 5 children, and Fotis was not able to see them. He only had supervised visitation once a week, about on average, and he wasn't very happy about that. So his lawyer, this is what Michelle says in the interview, his lawyer told Fotis that he and Michelle should make a timeline. And they should make a timeline for every minute of where they are, just to be certain, so that you can, I guess, present it to the judge at some point in case Jennifer wants to say that Fotis was doing something that he shouldn't have been, and that he was with the kids when he shouldn't have been, or something like that. So therefore, Fotis and Michelle should make a timeline. And that's why they did. That's why they made this timeline. So that's why, I mean, that's what Michelle's story is. That's why she made this timeline. It's not an alibi. She was actually just following what Fotis told her that she has to do, because that's what his attorney told him. Now, there's the first part of where a little bit of a motive comes in. And this evidence comes in the following: that they ask Michelle during the interview, how has it been with Fotis? Like, how has your relationship been? And she responds that this divorce was torturous for her. This divorce was really torturous for Michelle, because Fotis is always just depressed about it, and he's stressed out about it, and he's angry about it, and it's completely destroying any sort of semblance of a normal relationship between Michelle and Fotis. So Michelle herself did not appreciate what Fotis was going through, because it just translated into them having a sour relationship, not having a great relationship. So there we start to see a little bit of what probably the motive, or a motive, that the prosecution could be talking about, that would be the reason why Michelle would want to get involved and help conspire to murder Jennifer, because then once Jennifer's gone, so then this divorce is over, and Michelle and Fotis now can have a normal life together. So that's what I starting to sense, that was part of the reason that they brought that out. Now, let's talk about the Toyota Tacoma. There's this truck, Toyota Tacoma. And we're supposed to, again, we're hearing all this information, and we're trying to figure out why this is important, or if it's important. So there's some Ring cameras that pick up a red Toyota Tacoma, a very specific car. There's not many red Toyota Tacomas driving around. And this car was owned by a person named Pavel Gamameni, something like that. And this Pavel Gamameni was one of the project managers that worked for Fotis. So that's officially who owned this Toyota Tacoma. Now, this Toyota Tacoma is picked up traveling at 5:30 in the morning. That morning that Jennifer disappeared, it's traveling 5:30 in the morning. It's picked up again, and then it's picked up again on the highway. And there's something in the back of that of the Toyota Tacoma in the trunk area, which looks like something's doing there. And something that's very interesting is actually this guy Pavel Gamameni actually comes near Fotis's house at one point, driving a white Jeep Cherokee. So all of a sudden, Pavel is driving the white Jeep Cherokee. And the police officer stops him, because there's a police officer that was sent down there to the house to execute a search warrant. And it's a cul-de-sac, so only people that drive down that street are people that live there. And this white Jeep Cherokee, we know, is a car that is owned by Fotis. And this Pavel all of a sudden is driving this Jeep Cherokee. Well, now who do you think is driving his car, the Toyota Tacoma? That's the question. But the suggestion, obviously, is that was Fotis was driving it when he carried out this murder. That's what it seems to be from me. Again, no one's putting all these pieces together, but this is what I'm sensing here, that what the prosecution is going to argue is that Fotis took that car in the morning, the Toyota Tacoma, I guess maybe because it's somebody else's car, is less traces to him, and then that's how he carried out the murder. And then he switched cars essentially with this project manager Pavel. Anyway, so Pavel in this white Jeep Cherokee, he drives by the house where these police officers. A police officer stops him, and the police officer first asks him if he can search the car, and he says, "Yeah, sure." He starts searching the car, and then Pavel says, "This is really not my car. It's my boss's car. So maybe I'm going to revoke my granting you that authorization to search this car." So at that point he stops. But the police officer did notice something interesting, that there was these chairs, these seats, these bucket seats in that Jeep Cherokee. And the bucket seats were actually taken from a Porsche. And we know that in one of the houses that Fotis owns, he has a porch which have these two seats match that Porsche. And for some reason, these bucket seats are in this Jeep Cherokee. And now later, when they actually discover this Toyota Tacoma, when they find this Toyota Tacoma, those seats were actually put in the Toyota Tacoma. So these Porsche seats from one of Fotis's cars is now where its landing place is this Toyota Tacoma. I know it's hard to imagine. It's not put in properly, obviously, but that's where it's found. That's where these seats are found. So your mind is starting to race. What exactly happened? What happened to those seats in the Toyota Tacoma? Maybe they were so bloody, and that's why he got rid of them, and then he put in these seats and these new bucket seats. Maybe, possibly. We don't know because there was no opening statements. But that's what I'm sensing of what happened here. Okay, there's two other points I want to make. That there was a lot of DNA experts that were brought out, and the DNA experts take up a lot of time. They're talking about the different things that were tested and how they were tested and different ways to test it. And the prosecution basically brings them out. And really, you can sum up what they're saying the entire day in one sentence. Yeah, some of the DNA from Fotis was found on some of this material, and some of the DNA from Jennifer was found on this material. They didn't find any DNA from Michelle yet, but just from Fotis and from Jennifer were found on different materials. So really, you can sum it up in a few sentences, but in reality, it takes a long time for this evidence to actually come in. And if you'll notice, the defense attorney always gets up and he starts cross-examining the DNA expert. He starts asking about these different types of DNA analysis, and there's touch, and there's transfer, and there's this, and there's that, and the other thing, and he starts really getting into the science, and he obviously knows enough to be able to have some sort of discussion with them. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to experts, you're not going to, as an attorney, you're not going to know as much as your expert. You're just not, right? You may know some basics. You may know some of the, you may even have a better knowledge than just a basic knowledge in some of the stuff that the expert's talking about. But you're not going to be on the same level as the expert. Understand that. So you're not going to out-expert him. You're not going to, or her. You're not going to have a gotcha moment, right? You're not going to have that. But what you could do, and is what I'm sensing that this defense attorney is doing, is that he's specifically on purpose getting into the real weeds of DNA. And I think he's doing this, and it's funny because he actually says that he's doing this partly because he wants to make it clear to the jury. He wants to make sure that the jury understands everything that's going on here. But really, what he's really doing is, I think, trying to confuse the jury as much as he can about this DNA, the DNA testing. And the more that he's able to ask all these confusing questions and try to get into the science and get into how all this DNA stuff works and the testing works and their specific notes and what each note means, it's just, I think, a way to really put the jury to sleep. And anytime that the jury is going to be thinking about the DNA, they're going to remember, oh wait, but the defense attorney cross-examined that DNA expert for a long time. I mean, he must have brought out some points. What were the points? I don't remember. I couldn't really follow the conversation. But I don't know. I just don't want to think about DNA. And I think that that's actually part of what he's doing here. I think part of what he's doing here is not really to get any clarity. He's not really poking any holes in the DNA expert's testimony. I think what he's just trying to do is really just trying to belabor a lot of this DNA science and make it very confusing as possible to the jury, so that they really don't want to associate with it and really just say, you know what, I'm just not even going to think about the DNA. I'm going to base my decision based on all the other evidence. So I think that that's part of what he's doing. Now, one more thing that we're going to talk about, because we have to give a little bit of actual real legal analysis here, which is based on some of the rules of evidence. Okay, so what was interesting is that this defense attorney is making a lot of objections, and one of the objections that he's making is that any time that there's a video being played and the prosecution wants to ask the witness about certain parts of the video, he objects, and he says that the video speaks for itself. And he's been doing this since the beginning of trial. He's always objecting, no, there should be no explanations, there should be no commentary about what's being seen in the videos. The videos speak for themselves, right? And what's the prosecution's response? So if you actually look, one of their back and forth about this, the prosecution said to the judge, there's no rule of evidence that the video speaks for itself. So I thought that was funny. Like, it's true. There's no rule of evidence that the video speaks for itself. So I don't know what basis the defense attorney is objecting. There's no such rule of evidence that the video speaks for itself or the document speaks for itself. Of course, I'm allowed to ask questions about the video and ask questions about his observations of what he's seeing in the video, or what that means to him, or what that made him do, what his next step was. So of course I'm allowed to ask him those questions, right? So, but the defense attorney's response to that was, well, yeah, I'm not saying that there's a rule of evidence called the video speaks for itself. What I'm referring to is something called the best evidence rule. All right. Now, what's the best evidence rule? The best evidence rule, and this is, you can look it up in Connecticut Rule Evidence 10-1. And this is what it says. It says the following: to prove the content of a writing, recording, or photograph, the original writing, recording, or photograph must be admitted in evidence. So if you want to prove that such a writing exists, or that such a video exists, or such a photograph exists, you have to introduce that photograph. You can't get up on the stand and say, there's a video that I saw of Michelle and Fotis getting together and murdering Jennifer. I know that I saw this video exists. You can't do that. If you want to prove the contents of a photograph, you have to admit the photograph, because it's called the best evidence. What's better evidence? For me to tell you that the photograph exists, or for me to actually produce the photograph and admit it into evidence? So what the defense attorney is essentially arguing here is that best evidence rule says that you admit the video. So therefore there's no need for any explanation. There's no need for any commentary on this video. Right? Now, for one, he's right that you don't need to say, okay, as we see in the video, the car is traveling northbound now, and it's a red Tacoma. But you could say, as a video, that I looked at this video and that I was able to understand from this video A, B, and C. That you are allowed to do, because as long as the video is in evidence, you're allowed to explain or comment about the video. Now, to explain what's actually going on in the video, that's more of a gray area. But to be able to opine, or not, well, I shouldn't say opine, but to be able to give an observation or explain what your steps were because of a certain video, or what this meant to you as a detective, that could be admissible. So this was the argument that the defense attorney was saying, well, the video speaks for itself, so therefore there should be no commentary. It's really based on the best evidence rule, and the prosecution argued back that no, the best evidence rule just says that the video comes in. Once the video is in, then of course we're allowed to talk about the video. And I believe that the judge ruled with the prosecution on this case, that yes, as long as the video is into evidence, of course, there was certain times where he said, okay, we're not going to allow just a running commentary on it, but certain questions certainly could be asked about observations that you've made when you were reviewing this video. So that is, now you are completely, essentially caught up with the Michelle Troconis case, and we still have a little bit more of a trial, it seems like, left in this case, and we will keep you updated. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like the video, and we will see you next time.